begins to chill in the leaves and plants begin to turn brown and die, the minds of many children as well as many adults turn to witches and ghosts, to demons and dead men's bones, to jack-o'-lanterns and creepy goblins, to black cats and bats, eerie costumes and entertaining parties. It is again time for the weird and satanic festival that we call Halloween. It's an ancient pagan holiday devoted to the worship of Satan and the appearance of evil spirits and the communication with the dead. Every year on Halloween, magicians still attempt to conjure up the spirit of Houdini. Did you know that? Been doing it ever since he died. It looks like they'd finally realized he ain't coming back. After all this time without success, you would think they would understand that they missed the boat somewhere. Many parents, as amazing as it may seem, are fully aware of the origin and implications of this festival. However, many more little realize that for centuries before the birth of Jesus, this one particular evening has been set aside as the most important day of the year by witches and warlocks, by sorcerers and practitioners of the occult. Yet people from both categories insist upon dressing up their children and themselves in costumes and taking part in these demonic festivities. And even more alarming is the fact that a great majority of these people are professed Christians. You know, when I was going to college at Pacific Union College, I had my first encounter with adult trick-or-treaters, and it was quite a surprise to me because of all places it was on a Seventh-day Adventist University campus. I'll never forget even the little thing they said when they rang my doorbell. Open the door because somebody rang the bell, and there stands these college-age kids out there all dressed up and said, "Trick or treat, smell my feet, give me something good to eat." That little thing stayed in my mind. You see, before becoming a Christian, I attended many Halloween parties and activities, but I had never seen any adults taking part in the trick-or-treating. Even as a child, seldom were adults or parents with the children as they went door to door. The only time that I can recall where my mother went with my siblings and I was when she drove us to another neighborhood where they'd have better treats. It's puzzling indeed as to what possesses one to insist upon sending their children out to risk receiving booby-trapped treats. This year it won't be much of a problem at all, I don't think. Although there's probably a few dieharders out there somewhere. But in the past, they've sent them out receiving these things such as apples containing razor blades, candy bars with hidden needles in them, cookies containing ground glass, or other treats laced with harsh laxatives or poisons and drugs. And they think it's fun. Wouldn't it be better to go buy your child a candy bar or an apple than to risk their lives with something like that? Yet with the vivid realization of such gruesome accounts looming before them, these parents cry out, "Well, I don't want my child to miss out on the fun of Halloween I had when I was a child." Do they not realize that the world is not nearly as safe today as it was 50, 60 years ago? In addition to this, there are many things I did in my youth that I considered fun that I would never want my children to do. Period. I discovered that what I thought was fun, God called it the pleasures of sin. In addition to this, we tend to overlook the other incidents of bodily harm, whether intentional or accidental, that occur every Halloween, from children being hit by cars, or to the burns and falls that are caused by the costumes that they're wearing, and of what the damage inflicted upon a child's standard of values is. We seldom think of that aspect of it. They're being encouraged to take part in a pagan festival, but also to beg and exhort, to threaten or intimidate. And this can all be chalked up to being fun. Trick or treat. You give me something or I'm going to get you. That's what it means. I'll do something to you. In my youth, we would soap windows or turn over outhouses. Yeah, well, they were still around when I was a kid. We turned over a bunch of them things. Go back the next day and get paid to set them up again. Or a few other unkind actions, but never the destructive acts of vandalism that are so common today. Halloween is not only fun to many, but it is definitely big business. It is one of the top candy selling seasons of the year, with hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on items that are themselves harmful to the children. Millions of more dollars in profit are reaped by greeting card companies and the manufacturers and retailers of the costumes. Haunted attractions designed to thrill and scare bring an estimated as much as $500 million every year. You know, the last I heard, they've still got these haunted house things open this year even in some areas. Can't give those things up. And they draw more than, these haunted houses draw more than 400,000 people every year. Today, the U.S. alone spends an estimated $6 billion annually on Halloween. Figure that. $6 billion spent in this country on Halloween, making it the second largest commercial holiday of the year. About the only ones who do not profit from Halloween are the insurance companies. Vandalism claims run into the millions of dollars during Halloween festivities, ranging from little tricks to larger acts of vandalism, such as turning over tombstones in cemeteries, desecration of these places, and the numerous fires that are started around the country. It is amazing what we see happening today. In your bulletin there, you have a little insert that says, this is from the New Standard Encyclopedia. Halloween is celebrated with pranks and merrymaking, masquerade parties, weird decorations, witch stories, amusing, or by the way, amusing means thoughtless. Muse means to think. A is no thinking. That's what amusement is. These amusing, thoughtless games and the like. It's an occasion for fun for children. Halloween parties are popular. The place is decorated with figures of goblins, ghosts, witches, and with jack-o'-lanterns. That is the central focus of Halloween. The Good Housekeeping Book of Entertainment says it this way: Halloween decorations are quite as important as the food. When planning them, remember that if the room is to be dimly lit, the decorations must be bold to be effective. Orange, black, and red, the what? The devil's colors are the colors associated with Halloween. You could make a giant spider's web, complete with a large spider, one of the devil's favorite followers. This is what's behind Halloween, my friends. You know, coming to church today, I saw a house that, you know, there's a lot of them got these things hanging in their trees and cobweb looking. But one house down by where Sterling lives, there's a house that's got a spider about that big just outside the door. I wonder what they would think if they had a real one that size out there. Everything about this day centers on the arch enemy of God and man. It is a holiday. It is a holiday dedicated to him and his people. And many today ignorantly and some knowingly enter into these festivities on this day. Do not people realize that Satan and his demons are the enemies of God? They stand in direct opposition to him and his kingdom. Don't they even care that Halloween purposely worship and adores Satan and the hosts of darkness? All one has to do is to look at the costumes and the decorations to see that Halloween is a celebration of death and devils and witches and darkness. It commemorates beings and rights with which the church has always been at war. Therefore, how can a Christian church in any degree take part in it? As one traces the history of the origin of Halloween, it is readily discovered that more than 300 years before the time of Jesus, the Celts in England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, and also in northern France were observing a satanic service that evolved into what we call Halloween today. There existed among these people a secret society of pagan priests known as Druids, who controlled much of the religious thinking of the people of the British Isles and Gaul and Scandinavia. And these Druids were Satanists who worshipped and observed and served the demonic god of death called Samhain, or sometimes pronounced Samhain. Each year on November the 1st, these pagans celebrated the beginning of their new year with the festival of Samhain, also known as the Festival of Death, and which is still recognized today by all Satanists, occultists, and devil worship around the world as the eve of the new year for witchcraft. This day marked the end of summer and the harvest and the beginning of the dark, cold winter, a time of year that was often associated with human death. Did you notice time change? In your bulletin, let's see if I got that here. On the bulletin, I want you to see, I put the time differences in here for you. Sunset today is 6:39. Sunset next week, what? You're going to lose an hour. Because the thing we jump forward in, we fall back. Tomorrow will be the shortest day of the year. And that's what this whole satanic thing was about. See, the Celts believed that on the night before the new year, or on October 31st, the boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead became blurred, and the dead could transfer back over into the land of the living. And on that night, they celebrated Samhain, when it was believed that the ghosts of the dead returned to the earth, and the souls of the dead even revisited their homes. Consider that. Does the Bible teach anything like that? It teaches absolutely the opposite. It even says, those no more enter into their houses. The dead know not anything. But this is a complete contradiction of everything within the Scriptures. It was deeply embedded in the minds of the superstitious society of that time that on this night, demons and witches and evil spirits roamed the earth in a wild, furious, frolicking time of joy to greet their season of long darkness. The long nights and the early dark of the winter months, these evil spirits had fun with the poor mortals that night. of October 31st. They were frightening and playing all kinds of mean tricks and even harming people. So it was believed by these ancients that on that night, the dead roamed the earth along with ghosts and fairies and elves and evil spirits, and that witches rode brooms across the sky, throwing down curses upon those who did not take part in their ceremonies to honor or to appease them. So they offered sacrifices, and they held feasts for them. To commemorate the event, Druids built a huge sacred bonfires where the people gathered to burn the crops and animals as sacrifices to the spirits of the Celtic deities. What we call bonfires is actually bone fires. We also do that with French, you know, and we talk good, have a good voyage, bon voyage. No, it's bone. The word is bone in even French. But here it was bone fires because they were burning bones in these fires to bring back and appease those spirits that were very unhappy on that night. And since they believed that ghosts came back to the earthly world to haunt and to torment, they were instructed that in order to avoid being recognized by these ghosts and creatures, they must wear masks and costumes whenever they left their homes after dark, so that these evil spirits would mistake them as one of them. So these spirits were pretty stupid too, weren't they? Dress up like them and they'll think you're one of them. They would disguise themselves and go with their children from house to house to gather food and treats to appease the demon gods. And in this way, they would take the person for one of their own, and they would not be bothered by these spirits. Thus, the people could escape the fury of these horrible creatures and join in their roaming. To keep the ghosts away from their houses, some would place bowls of dainty foods and sweets outside their homes to appease the spirits so they wouldn't come in and prevent them from giving them trouble. Others actually set places at their tables for these spirits of their dead relatives. Some believe that if they did not observe these practices, they would be punished by being reincarnated as some sort of an animal. This is the origin of this stuff. What is it that these people in ancient times failed to understand was the power of the gospel? You know, this very form of parties, of trick-or-treating, of wearing of costumes, every form of that has come down to us practically unaltered today. Of all the things associated with Halloween, we see that the supernatural powers of black cats, I mean, even when it's not Halloween, don't let a black cat cross your path. All of this is from superstition. The witches on brooms, from the costumes to the door-to-door trick-or-treat, come to us straight out of paganism and devil worship. Now, by AD 43, the Roman Empire had invaded Great Britain. Okay, AD 43, so shortly after the time of Christ, Rome was already there. In the course of the 400 years that they ruled the Celtic lands, two festivals of Roman origin were now combined with the traditional Celtic celebration of Samhain. The first was Feralia, a day in late October when the Romans traditionally commemorated the passing of the dead. The second was a day to honor Pomona, the Roman goddess of fruit and trees. The symbol of Pomona was an apple, and the incorporation of the celebration into that of Samhain brought us the tradition of bobbing for Pomona's apples. As for the jack-o'-lantern, it has a most interesting history. As the Druids traveled about in the dark, they would carry with them a lantern made from a hollowed out turnip. You have a little thing in there explaining the history of how Jack carried the turnip, and you can read that later. But it started out as a turnip to keep this evil away from them, and there was a spirit that inhabited the turnip. The turnip had a face representing the demonic god, which gave them power and knowledge, carved on the front of it. It was believed that these spirits would inhabit the turnips and enable them to carry out the spells pronounced upon the homes and lives of those who did not take part in the Halloween festivities or yield to Druids' demands. This spirit, which flickered in the flame of the turnip lantern, also known as the corpse lantern, became known as Jock. But in the late 18th century and early 19th centuries, as this country was being settled, the name was changed to Jack from Jock. And the turnip was exchanged for a much larger and easily obtainable vegetable, a pumpkin. Thus we now have Jack, who lives in the lantern, jack-o'-lantern. Since Halloween is so clearly satanic, how has it been able to so thoroughly permeate the Christian world? With the professed conversion of Constantine, the churches began to be flooded with pagans, and with them came their satanic practices of every sort, many of which have been incorporated into the Christianity of today. And when Christianity reached the British Isles, many of the Druids, including the practices of the Druids, including the festival to the Lord of Death, was brought into the church. In the 8th century, Pope Gregory III attempted to Christianize this festival by declaring November 1st as the day of honoring and praying to the dead saints and martyrs. The day was to become known as All Saints' Day, also known as All Hallows, or eventually Hallowmass. That's the name of this evening before All Hallows, or the Holy Day, or the Day of the Saints, was called All Hallows Eve, or All Hallows E'en, which is the way that the Old English was. And it eventually just became Halloween. That's where the name comes from now. How holy is this supposedly holy evening? Where is God to be found in any of the festivities or practices that traditionally take place on this evening? By the 9th century, we had another pope, Pope Gregory IV, and he declared this day must be kept by all Christians. It became mandatory for the church, and that church action would be taken against those who refuse to obey and observe it. Thus we have the evolution of the Devil's Day from pure paganism to compromised Christianity. But since it commemorates beings and rights which the church has always been at war with, how can it be so readily accepted in the church today? The World Book Encyclopedia says that it is the beginning of all that is cold, dark, and dead. Doesn't that sound like fun? Cold, dark, and dead. When we encourage our little ones to take part, we are encouraging them to take part in all that is cold, dark, and dead, rather than looking to the life we have through Jesus Christ. I want you to consider something with me. The first time that your child encountered a trick-or-treater, how did they react? When I was in Bismarck, North Dakota, the doorbell rang on Halloween evening. Without thinking much of it, Well, she thought nothing of it. My little girl, my oldest one, Heather, ran to that door and pulled the door open. And she saw these little ghouls standing out there. She slammed the door in their face and ran back up the stairs. It's terrifying for a child, but we try to train them to think it's fun and then to even dress like that themselves. But boy, I never saw that little girl move so fast as she did back up those stairs. You see, most children are terribly frightened at their first encounter, but parents seem to think that's extremely funny. What are we doing to our children? Why don't we do the same thing with Santa Claus? We feel we have to take them to the store and let them sit on Santa Claus's lap, and you look at those first pictures. What are those kids doing? Their mouths are wide open. They're screaming a lot of times. They don't want to be there, but we want them to be there. We don't give much thought to that. You see, they scream and cry, but the parents think it's fun. Consider what is Halloween except for fear and horror and ghosts and goblins, death and devils, witches and self-gratification, and every evil imaginable. And just because a Christian does not worship Satan does not give them the right to serve him or play his games one night a year in the name of fun, and especially not to train up their children to do so. The Lord has sent us a warning cry to gather your children into your own houses, gather them away from those who are disregarding the commandments of God, who are teaching and practicing evil. There are some today who have tried to Christianize Halloween even more by dressing their children up in Bible costumes rather than the non-evil, so that they're not dressed up in the evil attire. But should we celebrate this festival at all? Which every witch, wizard, warlock, clairvoyant, spirit medium, magician, and satanic worshiper observe. Should we observe it with them? Period. Any of those groups, all of the occultist groups, will tell you that this is the highest day for them in the year. I submit to you that one cannot truly know God and the joys of his kingdom and righteousness, and at the same time be taking pleasure in the things of Satan and the kingdom of darkness. How can a true Christian find pleasure in fear and death and devils? How do they find pleasure in haunted houses, fright fest, satanic parties, and movies? How can they find humor and delight in exposing their children to these things? It is the spirit behind Halloween that makes it not only wrong, but evil and dangerous. You know, my son-in-law and daughter have invited us over for dinner tonight. And I sent him back a thing. I said, "Oh, phooey, I guess I'll have to change my plans to go trick-or-treating tonight." Because I was so looking forward to it, because I haven't done so since 1968. And I wasn't going to go tonight either. You see, we don't have to do that. What I usually do when I'm staying home is I turn my lights off. I don't put my porch light on and invite them to come and do that. It's just something we got to learn to move away from. The devil and his demons are delighted that the church seems to have lost sight of the fact that Jesus and Satan are the enemies of God and the enemy of God's people. They have come to accept Halloween, the holiday of the horrid hosts of hell, as an innocent little amusement, totally ignoring that it is a day that has been deliberately set aside for centuries for the express purpose of exalting and worshiping Satan. Everything about it is designed with the devil in mind. Most of you probably never heard of a woman by the name of Doreen Irving. She was the mistress of the high priest of Satan, ruling all the witches of Western Europe and England. Doreen became a born-again Christian, and she was saved from that. And this is what she says: if Christian parents had any idea of what Halloween really is, they wouldn't even mention the word around their children. This comes from the mistress of the high priest of Satan. As always, one of the greatest dangers facing God's people is their desire to follow after the customs and practices of the people around them. Is that not the problem that Israel had? They wanted to be like everybody else around them. Often they declare that these things are harmless, entertaining, or insignificant. However, as always, our only safety lies in our willingness to stand firmly upon the principles presented in God's Word. And God tells us, train up a child in the way he should go. Training them to go do this, is that training them on the way they should go in life? As such, how can we instruct or encourage our children in the ways of Halloween when everything about the festival is of the devil and completely contrary to the ways of God? God has also told us in the most plain and direct manner to learn not the way of the heathen. Yet, as we've seen, everything connected with Halloween has its origin in the vilest forms of heathenistic devil worship. A common phrase to justify doing what God has condemned is to say, well, I don't see anything wrong with that. I cringe every time I hear that. Well, I don't see anything wrong with it. I don't see anything wrong. That person does it. I don't see anything wrong with eating this. I don't see anything wrong with going. I don't see anything. Friends, God says there is a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are what? You see how clear that is? Whether you see anything wrong with it or not is not the thing. You may think it's all right. You may not see anything wrong with something. It might seem to be all right with you, but if it's contrary to the will of God and the principles of heaven, that something becomes a sin and it will result in death. That's how important of an issue. As the children of Israel were standing on the very borders of the promised land, God gave them some very important instructions. We had it in our scripture reading today from Deuteronomy. He told them that they were not to learn to do after the abominations of those nations about them, and that there was not to be found among them anyone who used divination, observer of times, an enchanter, a witch, a charmer, a consulter with familiar spirits, a wizard, or a necromancer. For all that do these things, God said, are an abomination to the Lord. Now, those things listed in that passage in Deuteronomy is exactly what Halloween is about. All of these things are there. And as such, how can we have any association with Halloween even if we think it's fun, even if it seems right to us? Today, as we're standing on the very borders of the eternal kingdom, God's call to us is, what fellowship has righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion has light with darkness? And what concord has Christ with Belial? Or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For you are the temple of the living God. As God said, I will dwell among them, and I will walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Wherefore come out from among them, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you, and I will be a father unto you, and you shall be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord. My friends, Paul tells us clearly we are to walk as the children of light, and to prove what is acceptable unto the Lord, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather do what? Reprove them. So friends, I just pray that you can understand more fully what tonight's celebrations are really all about. It is seated in paganism. And for us to participate, we're learning and practicing the ways of the heathen.